Alright, this video deals once again with the cranial nerves, but now we're going to take a look at the central connections of the cranial nerves. We're going to look at the nuclei, the cranial nerve motor and sensory nuclei, and see how they're organized in the brainstem. Let's get cracking. These are our objectives. Basically, know the central connections of all the cranial nerve nuclei. That's the objectives. Alright, you can pause this if you want, but you should know this in your sleep by now. The 12 cranial nerves are named for where they come off of the brain and brainstem, with the highest nerve being the olfactory and the lowest nerve being the accessory. And by the way, it has been decided and changed once again. The accessory is special visceral efferent, SVE, muscles of branchial origin. So that means the trapezius and the sternocleidomastoid came from gill musculature. Alright, you're probably sick of looking at scary things like this, but once again, this is our little table discussing how we get to our functional components. Let's look once again at the general components first, and then the special components. General stuff deals with just kind of the general innervation to the skin, the muscles, the guts, and also autonomics to the guts and blood vessels. And you can split the general stuff into somatic stuff, which deals with muscles, the body wall, the skin, and visceral stuff, which is under the skin. That would be the guts and autonomics. And then you can split it once again into efferents and afferents. So general somatic afferents are dealing with the skin and muscles of the body wall, pain and temperature perception, proprioception, muscle spindles. GSE is simply general somatic efferents. So that's mainly going to your body musculature, things innervated by the radial and medial nerve, etc. The eye muscles are general sensory efferents. General visceral afferents, those are gut pain, stretch receptors in your gut, deep pressure sensations in your palate, etc. Baroreceptor afferents are GVA. General visceral efferent. Whenever you see a GVE, think autonomic. And specifically when you're talking about the cranial nerves, think parasympathetics. The vagus is the biggest GVE nerve in the body. Alright, let's go to the special stuff. It's kind of simple. We've got special stuff dealing with gill musculature and special senses and taste, etc. We can split that into SSA, or special somatic afferents, and SV, special visceral afferents. And let's just jump to the bottom to make it simple. SSA refers to two cranial nerves, right? It's the special senses of hearing and sight. SVA is referring to taste and smell. Taste and smell is SVA. And finally, there is no SSE. Finally, there's an SVE, special visceral efferents, muscles which grew out of the pharyngeal arches or gill slits. Basically, that's all of the muscles of the head except for the tongue and the eye muscles, right? Those are of skeletal origin. Boom, brainstem once again. And we've kind of, some of these cranial nerves kind of impinge on different layers, but roughly we can kind of say that we have the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain, and it's roughly 442, as you can see here. 9, 10, 11, and 12 are medullary. The pons has 5, 6, 7, and 8. 8 is kind of like right at the junction here. And then 3 and 4, those are pretty solid. The oculomotor nerve and the trochlear nerve are indeed in the brainstem, near the red nucleus and the crus cerebri. Alright, here's another view of the hypothalamus. Now we're starting to get ugly here, because we're starting to draw in these cranial nerve nuclei, or some of the central pathways. And you can see here, we've got mostly sensory stuff in blue here. Here's the big fat 5 sticking out of the pons. You can see It mainly deals with sensation from the face, but it does have a motor portion, muscles of mastication, etc. And here are the sensory in blue here. And in this dark red here you can see the hypoglossal nerve, the vagus nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve. And most nerves are mixed. A lot of the nerves are mixed, some are not. Don't forget, now we're over on the motor side. Don't forget the genu of the facial nerve here. Boom, boom. The facial nerve bends around the abducens nucleus. So here's the facial motor nucleus in the pons. Sends out its fibers which bend around the abducens nucleus. Here we kind of strip the nerves away, and we're kind of splitting sensory on the left, and we're looking at motor on the right. Remember, some of these are parasympathetic motor nuclei. So these are nuclei, groups of cells, bundles of cells within the central nervous system. Cranial nerves are going to use one or more of these nuclei depending on how many functional components they have. Alright, let's make it ugly. I decided to go in and label everything for you. And let's start out on this side, on the motor side. Should we start at the top or should we start at the bottom? I guess we can start at the bottom. Spinal accessory nucleus is the first group of cells we're going to come to, and that's special visceral efferent for the trap and sternocleidomastoid. Those, remember, are muscles of branchial origin, gill slit origin. Now we can come up a little bit, and we hit the nucleus ambiguus, which is going to be SVE right here, mainly for muscles of the larynx, and cranial nerve 9, stylopharyngeus. Then over here we have dorsal motor 10. See the dorsal motor 10 right here? That's GVE. That's used by the vagus. So that's dorsal motor nucleus of the vagus. And that's going to slow the heart and speed up digestion. And right along the midline here, we have the GSE column right here. And that's for 12, muscles of the tongue. Okay, I keep alternating colors here just to kind of keep everything straight. Excuse me. We have right here the inferior salivatory nucleus. As the name implies, it's used for producing saliva, salvation, or salvation. That's what you need, salivation. And you can see it's a parasympathetic, and it's lower, it's inferior, so it's going to be used by 9. The superior salivatory nucleus right here is going to be used by 7 to make you cry, and also the sublingual and submaxillary glands. Those are both parasympathetic. Alright, the facial nerve says, hey, nucleus ambiguus won't let me play with it, so I'm going to have my own SV nucleus. And it is a nucleus for the muscles of facial expression. Right? 10 zebras bit my cannoli. Alright, we took care of the superior salivatory nucleus. Now we got the abducens nucleus. Remember I told you eye muscles are skeletal in origin? So that right there is general somatic efferent for 6. Now let's go up a little higher, right about here. What do we got? SV for 5. Once again, 5 has its own SVE nucleus. Does not use nucleus ambiguus. And these are for the muscles of mastication, the anterior belly digastric, the tensor tympani, the tensor veli palatini. All right, let's go a little higher. We're done now, just about done. These 3 remaining ones have to do with the eye muscles. So GSE here, trochlear nucleus, GSE for the superior oblique. And then over here, we have oculomotor nucleus, GSE for LR6-SO4, REST 3. And then finally, we have Edinger-Westphal nucleus up at the top, which is part of the oculomotor complex, and it's going to be parasympathetic for 3. It's parasympathetic, you're relaxed, so you're going to have a small pupil and a fat lens so you can read a book. And that's basically the motor nuclei. It's kind of a jumble, but just take a deep breath, kind of follow them up right here. Now we're going to look at the sensory side. So we looked at the motor side. Let's look at the sensory side right here. So again, let's see what we got. Over here in the midline, we have the nucleus of the solitary tract. It's abbreviated NTS. Sometimes it's called nucleus intractus solitarius. Remember, it's split. There's a rostral portion and there's a caudal portion. The upper portion is for taste. So any cranial nerve that has taste in it is going to use the upper portion. So that would be 7, 9, and 10. They all have some taste involved, right? SVA. And then if you go down, the lower half of it is going to be general visceral afferents. Who's going to use that for general visceral afferents? Well, 10 has a lot of gut pain and stretch receptors, so it's going to use the lower half. And 9 has some, 7 has some GVA, and so does 9. These are deep palate sensations. So nucleus intractus solitarius, upper portion, taste, used by cranial nerves, 7, 9, and 10. Lower portion, gut pain and stretch receptors, etc. Baroreceptors here. Carotid sinus, 10, GVA. Remember, the carotid sinus is actually innervated by 9. Parotid and carotid sinus, that's what we have in here, 9. Parotid and carotid sinus, 9. All right, that takes care of the NTS. What do we got? The biggest mess, well, let's kill 8 before we jump into 5. Right here, there's a little complex kind of in the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle. That's the vestibular cochlear complex for 8, right? So you're going to have the superior and inferior cochlear nucleus, and then you're going to have those 4 vestibular nuclei, remember? Superior, inferior, medial, and lateral. The inferior is also known as the spinal vestibular nucleus. And that's special sensory afferents, right? They got their own little fancy category, that and vision, SSA. All right, what's left here on the sensory side? Well, now we're just basically dealing with 5. And 5, remember, is this very long, spindly shaped mass. Motor 5 was over here. Now we're dealing with the sensory portions of 5. You have this very long spinal nucleus of 5. And remember, the spinal tract and nucleus of 5 deal with pain and temperature of the head. And what's unique is that pain will come in through 5, which pokes out of the pons, but then those fibers have to travel all the way down into the upper cord before they synapse. Second order fibers come up to go to the VPM. So it's kind of a very long circuitous route. What's in the middle here? The main sensory nucleus of 5 is in the middle, right here. So what is that analogous to? That's analogous to the dorsal column nuclei. The main sensory nucleus is going to be used for position, sense, vibration, and 2-point discrimination. I have it written right here. The spinal nucleus of 5 is more like nucleus proprius of the spinothalamic complex, right? And then finally we have this little, it's kind of insignificant, you can live without it, but it's like the mesencephalic nucleus is like a dorsal root ganglion, a pseudo-unipolar cell sucked into the brainstem. And its sole purpose in life is to help modulate the jaw jerk reflex. So when you're chewing or if somebody taps you on the jaw, you get this reflex that goes back to the motor nucleus of 5 and helps to rapidly close the jaw. So you can have a little jaw jerk reflex. So again, reiterating, what do we have for 5? We have mesencephalic nucleus of 5, Main sensory nucleus, it's also called the chief sensory nucleus of 5, and spinal nucleus of 5. So you have 3 sensory nuclei for 5 and 1 motor nuclei. Those nuclei for 5 are GSA, Girl Scouts of America, General Sensory Afferents. A mouthful, and we'll try to break it down a little later on. If you want to study this, is a nice image. You can look at this on your own, pause the tape. It's kind of what I just went over. Got nice color here, and it's kind of fancy looking. Look at the even split thalamus, midbrain, pons, and medulla. It's beautiful. Here's the 4th nerve looping around from the dorsum. And here's that sensory nucleus of 5. See, it's split. It's like a long spindle. Mesencephalic, principal, and then spinal nucleus of 5. And here you have cochlear and vestibular stuff. Very nice. And remember, that's on both sides, of course. In this simple drawing, I threw in here just to remind you that depending on the complexity of the cranial nerve, some will use only one nucleus. Here, the hypoglossal nerve just simply uses the GSE hypoglossal nucleus. Fibers coming out. There's no sensory portion of this tongue nerve here. But then the vagus goes crazy. The vagus is going to draw fibers from, it's going to draw fibers here from all over the place here. Are they labeled here? Help me out here. Dorsal motor nucleus at 10. Nucleus ambiguous. The solitary nucleus over here for taste and GVA. Right? And don't forget the spinal trigeminal tract and nucleus, GSA. So it's SVE down here, it's GVE here, it's GVA and SVA here, and that little bit of ear pinna is going to come through the spinal trigeminal tract and nucleus. So there's a complex nerve. 10, lots of nuclei. 12, one nucleus. All right. We're going to buzz through this old friend, the table again, and kind of look at the central connections quickly. Olfactory nerve is pretty simple, right? Olfactory bulb, cribiform plate. It pierces through the ethmoid bone to innervate the nasal mucosa. Its components are special visceral afferents. It innervates the olfactory mucosa. That's the main structure innervated. It's SVA, of course, and this is just to remind you how the olfactory bulb sits here, and these little mitral cells pierce through holes and can detect different very, very minute concentration of those chemicals, and that'll cause a generator potential, which will go back, and the bulb will go down, and it splits into medial-lateral stria, with the lateral strial going into the piriform cortex, and eventually talking to the hippocampus. That's why grandma's apple pie is burned into your memory. Next nerve is the optic nerve for vision, right? This one's pretty simple too. I mean, the whole process is complex, but you've got retinas, right? You've got the optic nerve, the optic chiasm, where the nasal fibers cross, the temporal don't. What foramen does it use? It uses the optic foramen, right? That little hole there. Not the superior orbital fissure, which is used by 3, 4, 5, 1, and 6. Components, it's one of 2 SSA. The other SSA is 8, right? And don't forget slow aim, right? The slow, right? Superior colliculus, lateral geniculate, optic functions. And it's relayed to area 17 of the calcarine fissure in the back of your occipital cortex. And just some pictures here to help you out. Here's, remember I said area 17, here's area 17, here's the calcarine sulcus. So it's 17 and 18-ish here. So damage to the occipital cortex can make you go blind. And remember here the positioning of the visual fields versus the retina. They're kind of opposite, because light over here is going to hit the lateral part of the retina. So if you lose this retina, you're going to lose your nasal field on this eye, even though you've lost the temporal retina. So just remember, it's how the light comes in. And Dr. Freistack talked a lot about various injuries. Here's just a horizontal section, caudate, putamen, globus pallidus, right? And here's the thalamus. The geniculates are going to be back over here somewhere. And it's just kind of showing you how the vision stuff ends up streaking across here. Optic radiations, these white fibers are called. And they're going to find their way into the banks of the calcarine fissure. This is the internal capsule right here. Once again, here's just another nice picture showing you the retina, nasal fibers crossing, temporal fibers not crossing, a relay in the lateral geniculate, which has layers, and remember this talks to the superior colliculus, and then fibers are going to go back into the calcarine fissure. Don't forget Meyer's loop, which is that special loop when damaged gives you pie in the sky. Third cranial nerve, the ocular motor nerve, two functions. The eye muscles are skeletal in origin, so they're GSE, general somatic efferents. 3 has a little parasympathetic nucleus called the Enger-Westphal nucleus. 3 goes through the superior orbital fissure, uses Enger-Westphal and the ocular motor nucleus. And of course, as I mentioned before, 3 is going to, via the ciliary ganglia, you're going to be relaxed, parasympathetic small pupil, fat lens to read a book, and the ocular motor nucleus innervates everything besides LR6 and SO4. And as I said before, this is a real nice picture. Cranial nerve 3 uses 2 nuclei, the Enger-Westphal nucleus. Here, this little red is supposed to represent the Eddy-Westphal nucleus. Sorry, I got that backwards. This little red is supposed to indicate the general somatic efferent component of 3, because here it's going to the extraocular muscles down here. And then this other portion is the Enger-Westphal, and via the ciliary ganglia, it's going to innervate the ciliary muscle and the pupillary constrictor muscle. Remember, we're in midbrain. Here's red nucleus, cerebral peduncles, substantia nigra with dopamine. And here's a picture of the real deal here. Remember, this is a myelin stain, so fibers are black. Cortical spinal tract plows through the center of the cerebral peduncles, substantia nigra with dopamine. We don't quite see the red nucleus because we're seeing the superior cerebellar peduncle, which is an efferent peduncle of the cerebellum, decussating and plowing in and around the red nucleus, so it's obscuring the red nucleus. But here you can see how 3, with its parasympathetic component and its GSE component, streaming down and making their way into the inner peduncular fossa, where they are susceptible to damage and brain swelling, especially uncal swelling, medial temporal lobe swelling. Here's the superior colliculus, and you can kind of see the 6 layers of the superior colliculus right here. Geniculate has the same laminations, the lateral geniculate. Pretty picture with no labels. These little black fascicles are part of the third nerve streaming down. So this is the ocular motor complex. Some of this darkness here can be attributed to the MLF, which remember ties the function of all the extra ocular nerves and nuclei together, so you can get conjugate eye movements, and that's controlled under the influence of the PPRF, right? Parapontine reticular formation, or para-abducens pontine reticular formation. What is this? Periaqueductal gray plays a role with pain modulation. Superior colliculus, medial lemniscus, probably a little bit of lateral lemniscus for hearing here. Substantia nigra, and beautiful cerebral peduncles. And we got a hint of the red nucleus here. And once again, why am I showing you this? Well, just the simplistic picture here with the third nerve complex up here. And for those of you who like the big picture, here it is, the ocular motor nerve, the ciliary ganglion, right here. So we're going to have motor fibers, and we're going to have parasympathetic fibers here. Let's move on to trochlear. Very simple nerve. It comes off the top of the brainstem. It's kind of a thin velum there called the superior medullary velum. It's foramen 3, 4, 5, 1, and 6. Superior orbital fissure. General somatic efferent. One stinking muscle. Superior oblique eyeball. Comes from the midbrain. Very simple. It's the only cranial nerve to come off the dorsum of the midbrain and to really cross here, or decussate. It has the longest intracranial exposure, so it's susceptible to increases in cerebral pressure. And it does the superior oblique muscle, which is right. IOUO, so do. Superior oblique, down and out. Down and out, my friend. And there it is. Cranial nerve 4. And we're at the level of the inferior colliculus. Here's the golf ball on the tee. Inferior colliculus sitting on the lateral lemniscus, which is part of the auditory relay system, right? The 8th cranial nerve. Cortical spinal tract, remember, descending upper motor neuron fibers, plowing through the center of the crus cerebri. Medial lemniscus for the dorsal columns. Spinal thalamic tract is here. Lateral lemniscus is labeled a little periaqueductal gray. There's MLF, I mentioned it before, for conjugate eye movements. And there's the decussating superior cerebellar peduncle. What tract is in there that is crossed twice? The ventral spinal cerebellar tract. Here we have a nice high-powered view, and I mentioned this already. And it's just a tiny little nucleus because it's got one stinking muscle to do, right? It sits right up here. Sits right here. All right, let's get the heck out of the brainstem and start work our way down. Trigeminal nerve. Big fat nerve coming out of the pons. But really, it's not that complicated of a nerve, so it splits up into 3 parts, right? Eyes, upper jaw, lower jaw. Ophthalmic, maxillary, mandibular. The attachment of the nerve is the lateral side of the pons. It's the biggest, fattest cranial nerve coming out of the brain. Foramen, right? Superior orbital fissure, foramen rotundum, foramen ovale, right? Standing room only, correct? And the stupid is for foramen spinosum, for the middle meningeal artery. What are its components? It's not that complicated. A lot of sensations. The great sensory nerve of the head. Don't forget tic de la Rue or trigeminal neuralgia, problems with the superior cerebellar artery pulsing on top of the trigeminal nerve, causing horrible pain. And then the other component is SVE, because remember, it has its own motor nucleus of 5, which is going to control movement of basically all of its muscles, are SVE, right? Because as I said before, all the muscles of the head except for the tongue and the extraocular muscles are SVE. All right, what's GSA here? Pain and temperature from face to the spinal trigeminal nerve, right? That's where it goes all the way down on the spinal cord, hooks back up. Conscious proprioception to the principal sensory nucleus or the chief sensory nucleus. And then jaw jerk crap from the mesencephalic nucleus. So you've got skin of the upper face, skin of the mid face, upper teeth, palatal mucosa, skin of the lower face and jaw, floor of the mouth, mucosa, the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, that would be like lingual stuff, lower teeth and gums, ear pinna, and canal. Remember, it gives rides to all these parasympathetic fibers, but it itself does not have any parasympathetic fibers. And don't forget tensor tympani, mylohyoid, tensor palatini, first arch muscles. These are all SVE here. And here's a nice overview. Here's 5 plowing out of the pons, and they show you how it's splitting up here to do different regions of the face. Right here. This hideous figure here is kind of reminding us of how fibers from the face come in and then dive down to the spinal nucleus of 5, and then send fibers that go back up through the VPM to get to area 312. So those will be the spinal thalamic-like fibers. Those that go to chief are going to they're going to synapse at chief and then go up. They're very, very similar to the dorsal column fibers, except they go to VPM also. And that's two-point discrimination, vibration, proprioception. And then don't forget, up in the midbrain, you're going to have that mesencephalic nucleus in the midbrain for the jaw jerk reflex. Let's see if we can get a better picture of that. This is mainly showing the sensory and motor function here. Ophthalmic, maxillary, mandibular. You're showing all the nuclei here. Spinal nucleus, chief nucleus, mesencephalic nucleus. This big fat guy is the trigeminal semilunar or Gasserian ganglia, which sits in the cavernous sinus. Here's another nice picture of the trigeminal complex. Bob is going to elucidate upon this a little more, but here's the mesencephalic or the jaw jerk nucleus, pseudo-unipolar cells sucked into the brainstem like a dorsal root ganglia. Here's the chief or principal sensory nucleus right there in the middle, and here's the spinal nucleus of 5. So it's like a long dumbbell here. Here's a trigeminal ganglia right here, right? That's going to have pseudo-unipolar cells in it right there. And there's 5-1, 5-2, 5-3 right there, right? Okay. And if we go medially, we find the motor nucleus of 5 for the muscles of mastication, etc. And remember, the same complex is repeated on the other side of the brainstem. And here again, back to this picture I showed you earlier. Mesencephalic, main or chief or principal sensory nucleus, spinal nucleus of 5, and you can kind of move the motor nucleus over here and imagine it right about here. And this is a blow up of the picture I showed you before. I shouldn't have gone into so much detail before, but you can just see here spinal trigeminal nucleus. So fibers, pain fibers have to descend, synapse, and ascend, right? That's why you get that cross pattern with a lateral Wallenberg stroke in the medulla. Right here. You lose pain and temperature of the face on the same side, but spinal thalamic fibers are cut here, so you're losing body pain and temperature on the opposite side. It's very important. The blue fibers are those going to the chief nucleus for proprioception, traveling up. So this is like nucleus cuneatus and gracilis. And then finally you got some insignificant jaw jerk fibers here, which are going to use the mesencephalic nucleus of 5. Right here it's labeled mesencephalic nucleus. And this in green is just showing that dumbbell again with the trigeminal motor nucleus. It's the general sensory nerve for the head, no analogs. So look at this. I've been beating this to death, but here are the analogs right here. You can pause that. And 5 is complex, but it has no parasympathetics. Once again, mesencephalic nucleus, jaw jerk, principal 5, like the dorsal column, touch and proprioception, spinal 5, like spinal thalamic, motor 5, SVE to muscles of mastication. And this is kind of just the real deal here, showing you a section through the pons here. These are probably cortical spinal fibers. This is all pons with pontine gray. This is where the medial lemniscus is kind of diffusely sitting here. I drew it in there. Right, here's the superior cerebellar peduncle, inferior cerebellar peduncle, mesencephalic nucleus of 5, and its tract is right about here. I drew in the ventral spinal cerebellar tract, remember, traveling with the superior cerebellar peduncle, principal 5 and motor 5. Very hard to identify on the cross sections, the actual cross sections. This is supposed to be the trigeminal ganglion, the sensory ganglion. And I think I beat this to death here. I don't know why I included this. We beat it to death. Another drawing you can look at it is kind of a nice, just showing you some of these fibers cross, some don't after they synapse in spinal 5 or principal 5. The main important thing to remember is with spinal 5, fibers really have to descend down. And we use VPM in the thalamus. These fibers use VPM and not VPL like the dorsal columns and spinal thalamic. Wild stuff, wild. And remember, pain and temperature from the ear pin are relayed from 7, 9, and 10. So you got that little bit of earlobe pinna crap, but they use 5 to relay this pain through spinal 5. Weird stuff. Here they're showing the ganglia that are being used. Geniculate for 7, superior ganglion for 9, superior ganglion for 10. And then this is just emphasizing that jaw jerk reflex. Done with 5. Say goodbye to 5. Say la vie 5. Enough of 5. Abducens nucleus. 6. One stinking muscle, right? It's GSE to the 6th. It's GSE to the lateral rectus muscle. What about abducens? Remember, fibers of 7, and we'll show this again, loop around it to form the facial colliculus. General somatic efferents, no SVE here. And this is just showing you, here's the oculomotor nucleus, showing you all the muscles done by 3. Here's the trochlear nucleus, going to the superior oblique, kind of taking a hard turn there. And here is the abducens nucleus. I kind of had to fix this because they kind of had them in out of order in this figure here. Lateral rectus muscle, pons 6. And where do we find 6? Right here. Right here, floor of the diamond-shaped 4th ventricle. This is about where 6 is. I kind of outlined it here. This is 7. Taking a loop here, so you got this is probably 7th motor nuclei. Fibers 7th go around. This is fibers 6 coming out. Here's another drawing of the abducens nucleus. This is 7. Remember, the bump is called the facial colliculus. This is part of the 7th nerve here. It's kind of coming at us. And this is the 6th nerve here. So 7 went like this. 6 went like this. All right, let's go to 7. 7 is a complicated nerve, right? Lots of things. Comes out at that cerebral medullary angle or the pontine medullary angle. What hole does it use? The internal auditory meatus. I forgot to mention that 6. It's 3, 4, 5, 1, and 6, right? Here's all of its components. GVA, SVA, GSA, GV, SVE. Here are the nuclei that it uses. GVA, nucleus solitarius, deep sensation. Stick your thumb way back in the back of your mouth. That's GVA, nucleus solitarius 7. SVA, some taste, right? Chorda tympani, anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Nucleus solitarius, the upper portion. GSA, sensation. Only GSA for 7 is a little bit of pinch your ear, and that's via 5, right? Sensory nucleus of 5. Parasympathetic. It's an important parasympathetic nerve, right? It's motor to the submandibular, sublingual glands, lacrimal glands in the nasal mucosa. So it's big, it makes you cry, and it makes you drool. That's its big thing. GVE. So it's using the superior salivatory nucleus. And then gill muscles, right? Muscles of facial expression all over your face. Posterior belly digastric, stylohyoid stapesius. There is the hideous drawing here. We got 5 in here. Why? Because there's some hitching a ride here. Fibers from 7 use fibers from 5 to get to the lacrimal gland. Fibers from 7 use the chorda tympani from 5 to get to glands and also to do taste. See the submandibular ganglion? Fibers from 7 had to use the chordae tympani to get down to the submandibular ganglion to parasympathetically innervate the submandibular sublingual glands right here. We show the genu of the facial nerve going around 6 here. Kind of important here. Remember the pterygopalatine ganglion. You have the greater petrosal nerve and the deep petrosal nerve kind of coming together here to form the nerve of the Vidian canal, right? And then those fibers are going to go up, right? And they're going to do the lacrimal gland, and they're also going to do glands of the nasal and palatine glands right there. There is the taste and deep sensation is going to be using nucleus solitarius, and there's that superior salvatory nucleus. And I've got the components here, GVE, SVE for motor functions. Nucleus and tractus solitarius are SVA and GVA. This hideous looking monster hand is just representing the 10 zebras bit my cannoli, the SVE fibers going to the muscles of facial expression. So it's not too bad if you just kind of trace it out and remember that 5 is the taxi cab that's going to relay a lot of these branches of 7. And this again is just showing you the nuclei of 7. The SVE facial motor nucleus, the GVE superior salvatory nucleus, and the SVA and GVA nucleus of the solitary tract. And we threw 6 in there just again to show you this genu, which makes the facial colliculus. If you stick a pin in here, what nucleus do you hit on the facial colliculus? You hit the 6th nucleus. And just again, another view here, looking at it from below, or anterior view, I guess you would say, showing the genu, salvatory nucleus, and nucleus intractus solitarius. And this is that picture we had been beating to death before, and it's just showing you 7th motor nucleus and nucleus intractus solitarius. And then this is a section here. What's it through? 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Answer me, damn it. Yes, it is through the medulla because we see the big happy olives. We see the hypoglossal nucleus. And here is the Cheerio, nucleus intractus solitarius. It's wild. Fibers going to and fro the nucleus are making the center of the Cheerio, where the nucleus goes around it. And this foamy stuff is probably dorsal motor nucleus of 10 right here. This is the beginnings of the inferior cerebellar peduncle, or it is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Reticular formation, nucleus ambiguous, lost in space here and here. And pyramids, and medial lemniscus, and MLF. Right here. So why are we showing this? I guess we wanted to show the solitary nucleus here. This is just a nice little sketch, once again, exaggerating the genu of the facial nerve, facial motor nucleus, 6th or abducens nucleus. Another picture, beating it into your head. Look at how 6 comes down here. 7 goes medially and then down like this. Here we threw these couple slides in just to let you know that Dr. Merchant is going to talk about this quite a bit, but it's hard to knock out. We're talking about the facial nerve and damage to the facial nerve or the cortical bulbar fibers, the upper motor neurons of the facial nerve. And we're talking about the facial motor nucleus here, right? SVE nucleus. So it's very hard to knock out the forehead innervation. because forehead innervation, the muscles that are innervated by the facial nerve in the forehead, receive bilateral cortical bulbar input. So a stroke or a tumor in the cortex is not going to wipe out the forehead. The lower face only receives ipsilateral cortical bulbar. From the opposite side comes down and synapses. And we'll show that next drawing. Let's show this here. All right, what do we have? If we cut the facial nerve, we're going to paralyze both the upper and the lower face, because that's the lower motor neuron. I mean, if you've got no impulses going to the muscles of the upper face and the lower face, it's paralyzed, damn it, right? But if you have a supranuclear lesion, meaning above the lesion, like a stroke or a tumor, look what happens here. You've still got some innervation here to the forehead. Why? Because there is bilateral input. There's either collaterals or different cells innervating both nuclei, both cells in the facial motor nucleus that innervate the forehead. Not the lower part, but the forehead and the eye. So you'll still be able to operate your eye. And that's really important. So that way you can look at a person and say, you know, open and close your eye, wrinkle your forehead. And if he can do that but has a frown down here, then you're going to think, well, he's probably got a unilateral stroke or tumor. If both sides are paralyzed, then he's got like Bell's palsy, a tumor at the pontomedullary junction, or polio, or some lower motor neuron problem that's going to paralyze both sides. So just remember, forehead, ipsilateral forehead sparing with a stroke. You lose it all if you cut the nerve. Lower face has contralateral input, contralateral cortical bulbar input only. That brings us to 8. So we're at the cerebromedullary pontine angle. We use the internal auditory meatus to get to the ear, right? To get to the inner ear, the vestibular and cochlear complex. Cochlear and vestibular, SSA, just like the eye. Cochlear nuclei medulla, vestibular nuclei medulla. Remember, lateral recess there of the fourth ventricle. What are we innervating? Well, the cochlea, the organ of Corti, and the semicircular canals. And it's a very complex, bilateral, hard to knock out system, which is using components of the cerebellum, right? And the vestibular system, here we're showing mainly the auditory portion, which is going to use the lateral lemniscus and the superior olive. I'm lost my, there we go. Sorry. So audition is going to use the dorsal cochlear nucleus. It's also going to use the superior olive and the lateral lemniscus and the inferior colliculus. And it's going to be relayed to Heschel's gyrus, right? And here we're showing that complex here. Remember the cochlear nucleus, we kind of call it the saddlebag over the inferior cerebellar peduncle. It's like a saddlebag here. And the vestibular nuclei are here. So this is all 8. Superior vestibular nucleus, medial vestibular nucleus, all here. There's a peppered look here to the inferior spinal, the inferior or spinal vestibular nucleus. And don't forget that the vestibular complex talks to the MLF. There's a medial and lateral vestibular spinal tract. There's medial and lateral vestibular spinal tract. They also talk to the MLF, the tectospinal tract, the vestigial nuclei of the cerebellum. All that is tied in so that you can have these vestibular spinal reflexes when you hear sounds or you begin to fall, etc. 9, we're getting close. Glossopharyngeal nerve, a lot of components. Posterior lateral sulcus is where it attaches to the brainstem. 9, 10, and 11 go out the jugular foramen. Here are its components. General visceral afferents, deep sensation from the posterior tongue and pharynx, but more importantly, the carotid body and sinus. Afferents are relayed through the glossopharyngeal nerve. Also, and they use the nucleus solitarius, remember the lower portion. SVA uses the upper portion for taste on the posterior third of the tongue. GSA, you can forget about it basically. It's just that little part of the ear through 5. GVE, parasympathetics, not too bad, just the parotid gland. Remember glope. And SVE, just one stinking muscle. So even though it's complex in the number of components it has, it's rather simpler in what it innervates. Not a lot. This is kind of showing the central connections here. We're going to use the nucleus intractus solitarius. We're going to use nucleus ambiguus because there is no glossopharyngeal motor nucleus. And we're going to use the GVE inferior salvatory nucleus. And remember, we got to use a little bit of spinal 5 to go to the ear. So I like this drawing. They're nice and simple drawings here. Back of the tongue, we think taste, we think solitarius, right? Salivary gland, we think parasympathetic, we think inferior salvatory nucleus, right? Otic ganglia, glope, that's for this right here. Stylopharyngeus, wherever the heck you are. Stylopharyngeus with the stripe on the barber pole, we think SVE, right? We think nucleus ambiguus. It's cool. This is the actual deal here, just showing you. Why am I showing this? Well, it's at the level of 9. Here's 9 here. Big, fat, plump, inferior cerebellar peduncle, also known as the restiform body. Trochlear nuclei are here. We're all at that pontomedullary junction right here. And again, where are the components? Here's the inferior salvatory nucleus, GVE for 9. Nucleus ambiguus is used by 9 right here. And then the trigeminal complex is used by 9 right here. That brings us to 10. 10 has a lot of components. It's also in that crowded area on the kind of the side where the medulla and the pons are meeting. Jugular foramen 9, 10, and 11. What do we got going on? GVA, nucleus intractus solitarius, sensations from the esophagus, the trachea, visceral sensations from abdominal viscera, from the lungs, stretch receptors, that kind of stuff. And also tastes and buds on the epiglottis and glottis. Nucleus intractus solitarius. Girl Scouts of America here. Remember that little bit of the ear. And 5, that little bit of the ear, trigeminal nerve. And a little bit of the tympanic membrane. Oh, there you go. Parasympathetics, dorsal motor 10. Very important for the heart and the gut. And nucleus ambiguus, muscles of the pharynx and larynx. Lose your nucleus ambiguus, you could probably die because you're going to lose that posterior cricoarytenoid and you won't be able to abduct your larynx. And here again is this nice section through the medulla. See the pyramids and the olive. And it's showing you the solitary nucleus, right? Solitary nucleus coming down. It's going to do some taste buds, right? And it's going to be doing some sensations deep down. Solitary nucleus. Deep down. General visceral afferents. It plays it's kind of the efferent limb in the receptor reflex, right? Raise blood pressure, baroreceptors fire, vagus nerve fires to slow the heart down. Spinal 5, ear pinna, a little bit of membrane. Nucleus ambiguous for muscles of the pharynx and the larynx. Nucleus solitarius is going to do a few taste buds back there on the glottis, etc. What are we showing here? I dug this up, Wikipedia or something. Functional components of vagus and their nuclear connections. Well, this is kind of showing, we don't mention the superior and inferior ganglia too much here. But there are these ganglia with pseudo-unipolar cells. Here from the ear, going to spinal nucleus of 5. And then this one here from the guts, the inferior ganglion. And then taste sensations are relayed through the inferior ganglion of the vagus. Here are these guys we've talked about already. And this is a slide I showed you way back at the beginning of the lecture, showing you how complicated a nerve like the vagus can be compared to 12. Because the vagus is going to use all of these nuclei, right? Dorsal motor 10, nucleus intractus solitarius, nucleus ambiguous, and spinal 5. And this is kind of showing you on the real deal where they are and how hard these things would be to actually identify. Dorsal motor 10 has kind of this foamy white look to it. Nucleus intractus solitarius is a Cheerio or a donut. 12 is kind of along the midline. Spinal tract nucleus of 5. Yeah, you can identify this white blob with this darkness here. Nucleus ambiguous, you cannot identify. Ooh, this is just a neat psychedelic three-dimensional view of the components of 10. Look at that, we beat it to death, but it's kind of a pretty picture. And this is just showing you Wassam's favorite nerves here. The vagus nerve with the superior laryngeal nerve splitting into an internal and an external component, and then the recurrent laryngeal branch of the vagus coming back and doing all of the muscles except for the cricothyroid, done by the external laryngeal. And the recurrent laryngeal is sensory below the vocal cords. The internal laryngeal is sensory above the vocal cords. 11! We're closing in on the end! Spinal accessory nerve, real simple, SVE. Motor to sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. No sensory component. 9, 10, and 11 jugular foramen. It's just showing you here. This is the cortical bulbar projection. You remember, don't forget, we can consciously move our neck, flex our trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. Here's the spinal accessory nucleus, and it has that weird route up through the foramen magnum, tickling the vagus nerve, and coming out. And we're going to call it SVE this year. SVE. And where is that? Way down here, spinal accessory nucleus. So fibers go like that. And this is where you see it in the upper spinal cord, spinal accessory nucleus, where you expect it to be in the anterior horn. Finally, 12, simple. It's skeletal, has its own hole, the hypoglossal canal, uses the hypoglossal nucleus, and it's GSE to all muscles ending in glossus except for palatoglossus, which is done by 10. And there's just a nice picture here showing you. Here's the cortical bulbar. It's coming down. Remember, you lick your wounds. You lick your wounds. So the tongue is going to point to the side of a lesion. There's the hypoglossal nucleus going to the tongue. Very nice. And where is it? It's right here along the midline. And here's a pretty picture showing you the hypoglossal nucleus. This is the medulla, and the nerve kind of coming out. Here is the medial lemniscus and the MLF. Here's the pyramid, so the nerve kind of sneaks out between the pyramid and the alba. And there are little guys labeled for you: nucleus ambiguous, solitary, dorsal motor 10, spinal tract and nucleus of 5, inferior cerebral, peduncle, olive, and pyramid. Again, just showing you a nice hypoglossal nucleus. Tongue deviates towards side of lesion. You can go pee if you want. All right, now what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you those images. We're going to build the cranial nerve nuclei again using a PowerPoint drawing. Here's the cranial nerves. We know those. Remember what has been told to you by Dr. Freistack, etc., that you have this set up in the spinal cord, the early neural tube, where sensory things are found in the alar plate, which is more dorsal. Motor things are found in the basal plate. And as the medulla opens up into the fourth ventricle, you retain that position. It's like you split it, cut it right here, split it open. So you have motor near the midline, motor midline, sensory toward the outer portion here. And then we throw in a couple other, a little bit of migration here, where SVE, the special visceral efferents, still toward the midline, but have gone down a little bit. That's nucleus ambiguous. And then GSA has kind of gone down a little bit, but still lateral. And that's going to be the area of spinal 5 mostly. So let's kind of see, and this is just pure evil. You can look at this if you want. It's all the cranial nerves with their nuclei. Oof. In this we've been beating to death for the last hour. Here we've kind of laid them all out for you. So we've laid out here, this is the motor side, this is the sensory side. And just this is just beating in your head why we have an SV component, because we have branchial arches. So anything innervating here, the head region, is going to be SVE, except for the tongue and eye muscles. And this little table, once again, is kind of showing you, here's the sulcus limitans. This is the sulcus limitans here and here. And that's kind of the dividing line between sensory and motor. This is a primitive medulla here. Okay, that's the groundwork. Let's go through these drawings here. All right, let's build these. Let's throw in all the different cranial nerve nuclei quickly here, because it's getting late and I'm getting tired. And life is short. And to quote Brady, there's balls to deflate. All right, it's GSE, GVE, GVA, SVA. So let's kind of see what's going on here. This is the motor area. This is the sensory area. Well, let's include this. So it's kind of like a motor wedge and a sensory wedge. And remember, these are laid out in columns all the way up the brainstem. So just don't think of little dots of nuclei. They're actually interrupted columns of cells. Let's start adding them. What's the first thing? We're going to work from low to up. So what's the first thing we're going to come to? Well, the first thing we're going to come to is spinal accessory, is way down there. And it also uses some nucleus ambiguous. So we'll come to that in a second. It actually kicks in the spinal cord, but then it also shares some nucleus ambiguous, has its own spinal accessory nucleus. But let's start out with 12. 12 has its own nucleus, right? The hypoglossal nucleus. So that's what you're going to come to first here. 11 has its own SV nucleus in the cord. Okay, let's stay on this column, the GSE column, and work our way up. And we'll do that for each column. What's the next GSE we come to? 6, abducens, lateral rectus, right? in the pons. What do we come to next? Trochlear, GSE, superior oblique. What do we come to next? Ocular motor, right? GSE. So that's it for the GSE column. Pure GSE, 643. There's a little more for 3, don't panic. All right, let's move to the parasympathetic column, which is still motor, parasympathetic motor, right? So here we have GVE, dorsal motor nucleus at 10 kicks in there, right? 10 is a very, very important parasympathetic nerve. Slows the heart, speeds up digestion. Then we have the inferior solitary nucleus, right? Or inferior salvatory nucleus, I should say. Inferior salvatory nucleus. And that's for 9. And that's going to be the parotid, right? Boom. Superior salvatory nucleus makes you cry and also salivate. Sublingual, submandibular, and lacrimal glands. Facial nerve. Boom. There's the other part of 3, the Eddy Westphal, the Edgar-Westphal nucleus, which is parasympathetic. So it's going to give you, what is it going to give you? A small pupil and a fat lens. You are calm. You are relaxed. You are placid. P for parasympathetic. All right, we killed GSE and GVE. Now let's look at the special visceral efferents, branchiomeric musculature. And that's nucleus ambiguous down in the medulla, right? That's what we got, nucleus ambiguous. Who uses nucleus ambiguous? 10 uses nucleus ambiguous for the larynx and pharynx. 9 uses nucleus ambiguous for stylopharyngeus. And that's basically it for nucleus ambiguous. Some textbooks say that spinal accessory uses a little bit of nucleus ambiguous too. If that makes you happy, fine. All right, we jumped up to 7. Let's go back here just to kind of boom. So that's it for nucleus ambiguous 9 and 10. And now we got 7 who says, I don't want to use nucleus ambiguous. I want my own SV motor nucleus. So we have the motor nucleus of 7 right there, right? It's the motor nucleus of 7. What does it do? Muscles of facial expression, posterior belly of digastric, stylohyoid, stapedius. Boom. Now we got 5. 5 muscles of mastication. Doesn't want to use nucleus ambiguous. Has its own SVE nucleus. So that's muscles of mastication, anterior belly of digastric, tensor veli palatini, tensor tympani, mylohyoid, etc. Are we done? No. We are done. I said no, but yes, we are done. Let's go back. Yeah, we're done. That's it for SVE. There's no SVE with the eyeballs, etc. So now we're going to go to the GVA, SVA column. There's only one nucleus that we care about in this column, and that's the nucleus intractus solitarius. Don't forget also the nose is SVA, so that's going to be up here somewhere. All right, who uses nucleus intractus solitarius, or the solitary nucleus? 10 does, right? Uses the lower part for GVA, gut pain and stretch, gut stretch. Uses the upper part for taste on the epiglottis. Who else uses it? 9 uses it, same thing, deep pressure in the palate, baroreceptors, carotid sinus, and it has a little bit of taste, well, a lot of taste, posterior third of the tongue. 7, same thing, stick your thumb in your mouth, that pressure in the back of the palate, GVA, and it's SVA to the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, taste, anterior 2/3 of the tongue, and I mentioned the nose is SVA, so we can kind of throw the olfactory nerve in up there at the top. All right, where are we going from here? We're going to do GSA. Now I didn't draw in GSA. Maybe if I redo this lecture in the future I will, but this is let's go back. Yeah. Boom. What do we got? We got spinal 5, right? And spinal 5 is used by the trigeminal. It's used by the vagus. Of course, spinal 5 is used by the trigeminal. It's named the spinal tract of 5. And remember, I told you that's the GSA is going to be the mesencephalic. We can lump them all together here. The mesencephalic, the principal, and the spinal tract of 5 are all GSA. Now, who else is in that column using GSA? 10, because the vagus is going to do the ear pinna. Who else? 9, ear pinna. 7, ear pinna, all through 5. And they're going to use the spinal portion of that. Remember, I didn't draw in mesencephalic, and I didn't draw in principal, but they're in the same column because they're GSE. 5. Well, okay, now I throw in 5 at the end. All right. And there's 5 at the end using its own nuclei for the jaw jerk reflex and proprioception through chief and pain and temperature through spinal 5. Now we go to SSA. Who's SSA? Ears and eyes. We are done, damn it. So we built up all those little nuclei. Oh my God, we're done. 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 31 seconds. That's a short Camtasia video for you to use. Good luck on your exams. Have a good life.